You're a wonderful man in your satin tights, Condor Man. Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues, where I talk about my favorite DC comics of the past that are still affordably available today, blabbing about why they are special to me and what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, this series does freely contain some spoilers, but I think even spoiled, these stories are still well worth reading. For more info about the intent of this series and what to expect from it, check out the video on the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel titled Essential Issues Series Introduction. Alright, we've covered some key origin stories from DC Comics. Now we're moving into stories that feature major events in the DC Universe, or that in some way define the status quo, or that are, in my view, iconic representations of DC characters. This time, we're falling more into the category of iconic representations of the DC characters and things that redefine the status quo, and there is not much more of a status quo changing or establishing work in DC Comics than Batman The Dark Knight Returns, which just radically changed and influenced going forward what Batman was to readers for decades. So let's just dive right into this thing. Bruce Wayne, around 60 now, has retired from crime fighting, and Batman hasn't been seen for 10 years. He seems to be looking for a reason to live, though, displaying death wish tendencies in a race and feeling a growing desire for something more. He says, "In my gut, the creature writhes and snarls and tells me what I need." Bruce Wayne is a deeply haunted and even disturbed man. I'm reminded again that this story brought a psychological complexity to the character I had never seen or even considered before, but that makes perfect sense for someone as driven as he is. The story establishes immediately that the memory of his parents' death is as fresh as ever. He has never adjusted to it or found peace with it at all. And I've come to find this to be an extremely valuable component of any Batman story since then. I do not want a well-adjusted Batman. There are subtle references to the death of Jason Todd as the reason for Batman's retirement, so obviously today one would have to read this as an alternate history as well as a possible future story for Batman. But the death of Jason isn't a powerful enough ghost to defeat what is happening inside Bruce, who senses that a new breed of street criminal requires Batman's return. Again, highlighting Bruce's psychological issues, this process begins on a subconscious level when Bruce unknowingly shaves the mustache he has had for years, presumably in preparation for wearing the cowl again. The news reports on crime pile on top of each other, bringing Bruce to the edge, where he's finally pushed over by a bat, once again, as it did decades before, breaking through the window of his study. Now, adding to the psychological is a sense of the mythical, as though Bruce is driven by a supernatural force or being to continue his work as Batman. In the next sequence, Batman is back in Gotham, but for pages we don't see him. He is treated like a horror movie monster, invisibly taking out his victims as they scream in pain and terror. I had never seen this kind of Batman before. It was a reversal of the horror movie experience, where I found myself rooting for the monster and his decisive, terrifying punishment on the deserving. This is also a Batman who is dealing with the limitations of his body. In this story, because of old age, but many Batman stories after this gave significant focus to Batman's humanity and how he pushes himself to his limits. Just one more way this story was influential for decades after it was first published, and why it still holds up well today on many levels. It's a driven, tough Batman who is very much needed in Gotham, that is far darker than we had seen in comics before, and even still dark enough to match today's standards of Batman stories. The criminals are nasty, sadistic, violent, almost animalistic creatures. In this story, a very dark evil is presented that requires a very driven hero to stop it, as the audience feels the great need for him to succeed. There are also political overtones in the writing. This is a Batman who is fed up with the laws that protect criminals from justice. He has a sort of extreme conservatism about him, while at the same time resembling the modern extreme liberal tendencies toward asserting one's sense of justice at the expense of others' rights. I'm reminded of today's cancel culture and some instances of protesters strategically drowning out the free speech of others. There are also brief panels featuring news anchors or man-on-the-street interviews exposing the hypocrisy and logical inconsistencies possible and present on both ends of the political spectrum. There's also a sense that the writer, Frank Miller, is frustrated with people not being held responsible for their actions. Dr. Walper, a psychologist who has been working to rehabilitate Harvey Dent and other criminals, seems to be obviously performing mental gymnastics in order to blame Batman for their criminal behavior. The Doctor, several times in this story, parallels the modern tendency to justify criminal or sinful behavior by creating a label for it, as though removing its mystique makes it acceptable or even morally good, or at the very least removes responsibility for the behavior from the individual. A little further in, and we're introduced to a young girl dressing up as Robin and preparing to go out and make a difference in Gotham, while her off-panel parents comment on the horrible state of the city, but stay inside getting high. I've almost never been a fan of the concept of Robin. Like Superman, the character has to be written in a particular way to work well for me. I don't much care for this Robin either, but her introduction page feels timeless, as though representing two kinds of people: those who talk about the world needing to change but remaining detached from it, and those seeing that need and willing to take risks to bring that change about. I can't help but see myself a bit in Robin's off-panel parents, swapping out drugs for creature comforts, safety, and entertainment in my case. And though this Robin is foolish and naive, I appreciate her willingness to take the action she does. Speaking of taking action, Batman is more aggressive than ever in this story, and some fans may take issue with him using a gang member's gun to kill another gang member when a baby is at risk. It's a choice to kill that police officers can and do make, but something about Batman in particular using a gun and killing may rub some readers the wrong way. Personally, I generally prefer Batman not killing, but this is a different Batman. Some may not like him or versions inspired by him, such as Ben Affleck's version in Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, but it is one interpretation of the character under certain circumstances, and I think it can work in those circumstances. As Batman looks to take on the mutant gang that has terrorized Gotham, we get our first full look at the Batmobile, which is essentially a giant tank. Nothing sportsy about this car. It's a hulking death juggernaut. I wasn't sure I liked it at first, and still don't as a general preference, but it quickly grew on me as very fitting for, again, the circumstances of this story and this Batman. After a defeat I won't spoil that leaves Batman broken, dragged to safety by the aspiring new Robin, we get a hint of where the story is going as we overhear a conversation between Superman and the President of the United States, who asks Superman to talk to Batman and get him to back down from his activities. Frank Miller has gone on record saying that he is proud of breaking up the bromance between Superman and Batman, reasoning that these are two guys that would just not get along. He viewed Superman as being on the side of the establishment, while Batman is a rogue operating clearly outside the law. It could be argued that during the 1950s, Batman was just as much a patriotic hero of the establishment as Superman and every other superhero during that time, but while I wouldn't want Superman and Batman to always be actual enemies to each other, I'm grateful for what Miller did to their relationship here and the tension between the two that has forever carried over into the mainstream DC universe. Batman learns from his mistakes and, in an extremely memorable rematch, establishes why he is so formidable, not because of his expertise in martial arts, but because of his brilliant tactical mind. Another facet of his character that is played up in this story and reverberates in many future Batman stories when he is up against someone who clearly outmatches him physically. When Batman goes up against another guy who is bigger, faster, and stronger than him by a mile, be concerned for the other guy's safety. That said, Superman enters the story like some kind of force of nature. We don't even see him at first, just the destruction he causes from merely passing through. He arrives at just the right time to pose a new threat to Batman. Bruce and Clark meet out of uniform, and Clark gently warns Bruce that if ordered, he will take Bruce down. Bruce essentially responds with "bring it on" in a sense, and sets the stage for an inevitable conflict of more than just methodology. Dr. Walper brings the Joker on a late-night talk show to demonstrate to the world how he has been cured. Batman knows what's going to happen, but the new commissioner is determined to arrest Batman as he predictably tries to bring the Joker down before he can kill again. With the police interfering, the Joker succeeds in mass murder. Both he and Batman escape, and while Batman is hunting down the Joker, the new commissioner and police force are hunting both of them. As you might guess, the story involves a final confrontation between Batman and the Joker, final with a capital F, and the kind that really can't happen in the regular comics because it's the end of all conflicts between Batman and his greatest villain. Does Batman finally cross that line? Well, I won't spoil that here, but the outcome leaves the Joker dead and Batman still on the run from the new police commissioner. The final book in the miniseries is admittedly my least favorite. A major catastrophe causes all of Gotham to lose power, and the remnants of the mutant gang, many of which have patterned themselves after Batman, take the opportunity to exert control over the city. But Batman literally rides in on a horse and stops them. I'm not sure I'm really keen on that visual even today. Instead, using his influence to become their new leader. Meanwhile, Superman is withering away after being hit by a nuke and having the sky blotted out so that he can't absorb the rays of the sun to recover, so he begins a weird internal monologue about the Earth being his mother, and I kid you not, gets healed by some form of flower power. But, I gotta think to myself, when this was written, the mid-70s were only as far in the back in the rearview mirror as 2010, is to us right now. So, you just kind of have to shrug and say, okay, that was a bit of the times there. In other ways, the story zooms out to focus on the city as a whole, which it had already done up to this point, but I really wanted it to start zooming in even more on Batman as we bring this story to a close. So to me, this part of the story feels like it's focusing on the wrong things, the wrong characters, too often. As world building and political commentary continue, I'm ready for this story to just be about a small ensemble cast. Thankfully, I'm still rewarded with a fight that is the culmination of tensions between Batman and Superman in this story. Although it's been done bigger and better in other stories since then, including the animated adaptation of The Dark Knight Returns, this was the first time these two characters had been true enemies. An historic moment that has been called back to many times in different ways in the decades since. The story leaves room for a sequel, which Frank Miller wrote many years later, and which I really didn't like. I liked his run on All-Star Batman and Robin even less, but with Batman The Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller gave us a version of the character that has left its mark and continued to define who he is today. You can get The Dark Knight Returns on Amazon new for $15 and for a lot less used on Amazon.com at the time of this recording. You can also read it for free with an Amazon Prime subscription on Kindle and Comixology. All right. Well, I blew through that. I mean, I didn't even bring up, I don't think, Harvey Dent and a whole bunch of other stuff. This is a big tome of a story. And so I neglected to mention so many things that you could still get out of this. It really could have been a three-part series for me to talk about, but I just wanted to give one segment to it so that we could continue moving on through other stories in the DC universe. Next up, we are jumping into the future, all the way to 2001. Or at least 2001 was the future at the time that this story was written. It's not exactly an earth-shattering event, but it introduces both a hero and a villain that would play major roles in DC event stories later on in DC publishing history. So I think it's an important one to be familiar with. It's also one that I enjoyed, and I hope that I'll enjoy it again as I come back to it a second time. We will see. It's a time-traveling tale exploring which of the DC heroes was destined to become one of its most dangerous villains. This is maybe very well a story that you missed even if you're a DC fan, but I think it's definitely worth checking out. Next time we're going to take a look at Armageddon 2001.